A map that has been in front of us for decades now has finally been laid bare with its lies. The map I'm talking about is not any ordinary map, but the one we all associate with the world's most famous supervolcano, Yellowstone National Park. Yes, it's that map that has the boundaries of the park as well as its most iconic features, such as the geysers and hot springs, and even its supervolcano caldera. And now this map is being called out for having some pretty big flaws. So what's going on here? Why is this map under scrutiny after all these years? And what does it get wrong? How could something so fundamental to understanding Yellowstone be so very wrong? Let's take a look at why scientists are calling out this map and what it gets so wrong. In this episode of Fake Science News, we will examine the so-called Yellowstone map, which has been used for decades to help visitors navigate the park. The map was created by the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, and the National Park Service, NPS, and was last updated in 2014. It's widely available online and in print in visitor centers, campgrounds, and other locations throughout the park. And if you haven't seen it before, here it is. The map shows the boundaries of Yellowstone National Park as well as some of its most notable features, including the Grand Loop Road, Old Faithful, Mammoth Hot Springs, Norris Geyser Basin, and the Yellowstone River. But there's also a lot of things on this map that aren't really there. That's right. There are lots of things depicted on this map that have never existed or no longer exist. The first thing that we need to talk about is probably the most obvious thing that is wrong with this map. Let's start off with that huge white space in the middle of the park. If you know anything about Yellowstone, then you know that there shouldn't be a giant white spot in the center of the park. That white spot is supposed to be the Yellowstone Caldera, the gigantic crater left behind by the supervolcano that lies beneath Yellowstone. This caldera is more than 40 miles across and stretches from just north of Old Faithful all the way to the eastern edge of the park. It's also home to some of Yellowstone's most famous geysers and hot springs, including the Grand Prismatic Spring. But on this map, it just looks like a giant white blob. But hold on a second. When we zoom in on Google Earth, the caldera is nowhere to be seen. So where did this big white space come from? Well, it turns out that the caldera isn't actually there anymore, at least not in the way that it was once. You see, the Yellowstone supervolcano has erupted many times over the past 2 million years, each time leaving behind a new caldera. The current caldera is the result of the most recent eruption, which occurred about 630,000 years ago. But since then, the caldera has filled with water, creating what we now call Yellowstone Lake. So if you're looking for the caldera on this map, you won't find it. But if you look closely, you can actually see the remnants of the old caldera on either side of Yellowstone Lake. On the west side of the lake, you can see the remains of the Mesa Falls caldera, which dates back about 1.3 million years. And on the east side, you can see the remains of the Lava Creek caldera, which dates back about 800,000 years. Okay, now let's move our eyes away from that huge white space in the middle of the park and instead focus on the Yellowstone River. We can see that the river flows out of Yellowstone Lake and makes its way through the park, eventually emptying into the Missouri River. But if we look again at Google Earth, we'll see that the river doesn't actually flow that way. In fact, the Yellowstone River actually flows into Yellowstone Lake, not out of it. This means that on this map, the Yellowstone River is flowing in the wrong direction. And lastly, let's take a look at some of the other features on this map. One of the most iconic features of Yellowstone is Old Faithful, the world's most famous geyser. And on this map, it's shown as a small pool of water surrounded by a boardwalk. But if we go to Google Earth, we'll see that Old Faithful is actually much larger than what's shown on this map. Not only is the geyser itself bigger, but the boardwalk is also much smaller. And because of this, it's easy to see why so many people have gotten lost trying to find Old Faithful. The same is true for Mammoth Hot Springs. On this map, it's shown as a single spring, but in reality it's a complex network of terraces and pools. Because of this, the map doesn't really do a good job of showing the true scale of Mammoth Hot Springs. So why is it that this map is so inaccurate? Is it just a case of sloppy map-making, or is there something more sinister at foot? Well, it turns out that there is a reason for all of these inaccuracies, and it all has to do with how this map was made. You see, this map wasn't made with the intent of showing the geography of Yellowstone National Park. Instead, it was made with the intent of showing the most important features for visitors to the park. The USGS and NPS wanted to create a map that would be useful for tourists, not a map that would be useful for scientists. Because of this, they left out a lot of features that might be important to scientists, such as the Yellowstone Caldera and the true size of Mammoth hot springs and Old Faithful. They also didn't want to clutter the map with too much detail, so they left out a lot of other features as well. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. After all, this map is intended for tourists, not scientists. But it is important to remember that this map isn't completely accurate. Some of the features shown on the map don't really exist anymore, while others are much smaller or larger than what's shown. When looking at this map, it's important to keep in mind that it's a map meant for tourists, not a scientific map. If you're planning a trip to Yellowstone and you're using this map, you should keep in mind that some of the features shown on the map may not be exactly as they appear in real life. For example, Old Faithful is much larger than what's shown on the map, and the boardwalk is much smaller. This can make it difficult to find Old Faithful if you're following this map. But even if you're a scientist, this map isn't entirely useless. Even though it's not a great map of Yellowstone's geography, it is still a great map of the park's most important features for tourists. If you're a scientist visiting Yellowstone, you probably won't find this map to be very useful, but it may still be useful for finding things like restrooms and visitor centers. I think it's safe to say that this map is far from perfect, but it's not the worst map I've ever seen. And it's certainly not the worst map I've ever made. That honor goes to this map, which I made during a particularly challenging week in my life. Despite its flaws, this map has served millions of tourists well and will continue to be a popular resource for years to come. Just remember, when you're looking at this map, it's not a perfect representation of Yellowstone, but it's still a pretty good one. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something new. If you did, please hit the like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe.